Welcome to the Redacted Culture Cast. Today we are returning to the world of communications and radios. As we have had opportunities to talk with, let's just call you influencers because it's funny, people in our industry, in our circle, about both comms and what it looks like. It's an ever expanding and complicated subject. So today, my guest will actually introduce yourself. Go ahead.
I'm Josh Bronson. I'm the founder and owner of DISCO32. We're a manufacturer and retailer of tactical communications enablers. And when I say enabler, all I mean is something that allows you to use your radio to communicate more effectively. And we kind of look at it from the perspective of a tactical communicator, which is a little bit different than a lot of the other brands that are out there. But it's a pleasure to be on here. Look forward to chatting with you over the next few minutes on just whatever comes to mind, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're at least somewhat aware when you look at your outbox, but I think just about everybody I know has something from your shop, whether it's an adapter or it's something to make my military headset work with a Baofeng radio or with this kind of stuff. So I wanted to have you on the show because we had a conversation about a couple things to do with communications, and it was like, well, this is right in line with what we're doing here over at Redacted. So where can people find you? For those who are actually listening and don't know, because where can they find you? What are the solutions that you produce?
Yeah, so website, disco32.com. We have a social media presence, like we have a little Instagram presence and a little Facebook, and we're trying to do Twitter. But you can pretty much look up DISCO32 anywhere and find a lot of those links. But kind of where our niche is making those military accessories work with these commercial off-the-shelf radios. And it was a problem that I found, it was something when I was in the service, a lot of times I would need like a widget, to make my job, just make me a more efficient person. Better at my job, and I couldn't really find anything. I couldn't find like a nexus where I could go online and buy the stuff and at a price point that I could afford, as like a staff sergeant. So in 2017, I decided to kind of start the business and started, we bootstrapped the whole thing. We started it. We didn't take any funding from anyone, and we started just selling stuff on marketplaces on Facebook. And then just kept building and building and building to the point we're at now, where we have several employees, a facility, we have an engineer and staff, we have, advised software engineer, electric engineer, some other employees. So it's very cool. I'm very happy, I'm very proud of what we've created here and what the team has done here at DISCO32. It's been pretty awesome.
Yeah, so back in my military days, there was kind of the myth and mystery of the comms guy, the RTO, who was able to spindle up cables at any given moment, which,
it's the black magic. He was the magician.
Well, yeah, and you're also like a 20-year-old 2 deployment veteran sitting here going I have no idea what's going on, but make radio work. It lost Phil. So you kind of hand it over, and he puts the magic. I mean, you know how it's working, but.
Yeah.
But the other side of it though was definitely I probably at one point in time had like 20 PTTs, and I held on to the ones that didn't work for no reason, and then
exactly
it's
everyone, especially guys from a combat arms background, especially infantrymen, we're all a bit of a tactical hoarder. We don't want to throw this one thing away because it might work in this one situation, and I've been retired for 2 years and I still have a pile of Army stuff because I can't bring myself to I might need this particular Molly adapter or buckle or whatever it is.
Well, you may have military experience above mine, but I have veteran experience above yours, and I can say, listen here, dear son, it will eventually go away. So
you.
it took me about probably 10 years before I started getting rid of certain things, but some of it was out the door right away, and some of it was okay, I don't need 3 stubby foregrips. I don't need
exactly.
I'm not going to build 7 clones of this thing. So
Yeah, I went through, I did do a little bit of a purge in the local Army surplus store here in town. They got the hookup. I went in there, just kind of dumped out in front of them, and they saw a couple. I left a couple goodies in there, and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and so some of it went away, but a lot of the good stuff still in the pile in the garage.
Yeah, well, it's just kind of the way of it too, because the stuff you leave the military with is just very strange.
Yeah. So yesterday we talked a little bit about just BSing on the phone a little bit, and I've listened to a few of the podcasts, and especially the one with Mojave, and we're trying to kind of grasp, like what is a radio? What am I going to use a radio for at home? And I hit on it a little bit, and I think it's a good place to start.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I have this radio. What is it? Well, you have to really look at a radio. A radio is a teamwork enabler. So really what it does is just allows you to communicate beyond, visual distances, beyond your audible distances, and communicate with another person and coordinate. And that's basically the gist of it. It just enables you to operate as a team. And then really any serious scenario beyond, here we talked about, you mentioned Born earlier, beyond Born, you're going to need to operate as a team. You're going to have, for any situation, you're going to have to rely on other people, whatever that situation is, to help you out. And radios really enable that.
Yeah, we've noticed that, and we've mentioned a couple times in the show that one of the cultural shifts that's taking place or has taken place within gun culture is that the kind of era of the isolationist is over, where like the lone prepper kind of idea. And I know that's a bit of a caricature, so I don't want to beat it down too far, but it really does stand out that like so much of our contemporary gun culture is interested in being in concert with other folks. It's whether it's going to shooting matches or spending time with other people or having a gang in the best of light. And so though there is a certain like, there's no use for me having a radio if I'm alone is the first thought. Or if you intend to be alone, it's just to avoid people. But that's like video game logic in my opinion.
I think in any situation, when you go from, whatever, let's just call an event like we'll call that E-Day, like event, whatever event that is, natural disaster, like whatever, to all the way to like worst case scenario. I think that like by event plus 10 days, you'll start to see like a breakdown in infrastructure, like communications infrastructure. And you'll need some way on your own without having any infrastructure in between to communicate with other people. And that's where that like real simple radio comes into play, because even, what was your primary during the riots, your primary form of communication was the cell phone, right? And you never lost signal. You said it got pretty busy, but you never lost signal. It all worked. Everything was going. And a lot of communications infrastructure is extremely robust. That's in the United States and, worldwide. It's just pretty robust, and it usually lasts for a while. So you can probably depend on that for a little bit, but you go forward 10, 12, 15, 20 days and, things aren't getting better. That's when you're really going to have to rely on just that little magic box to talk to your buddies.
Yeah. I could imagine like an extended, I can't imagine a world where we don't have cell phone towers in the future or cell phones, right? I can't imagine like a permanent world where I have a hard time or cannot imagine a world in the future where there is no longer the internet or the phone or because the technology is so integrated into our culture and our society that, and it's not so black magic voodoo that it's not that it may not be recreated at scale quickly, but it's not like it's going to go away. Like we're not going to have a time before electricity. So, so those things, like those kind of things make sense to me. And so the value of a comms capability, the value of being like, let's just say radio capable is actually twofold. The one side of it is you have something that functions. It's very atomized. It's very individual. So I have my own radio There's no, and that radio is not dependent on towers. It's not dependent on infrastructure. So even if we have a natural disaster or social issue where terrorists decide to do terrorism things specifically against like communications pathways, I'll still have something. But eventually, those towers will come back into operation, and the cell phone. There's a reason why we talk to each other on cell phones, not on radios, because they're intensely personal and we can get to each other. The second thing, though, is the social aspect of being radio capable. Is that like it's something to do with your tribe or your people that allows that in some ways, like what a kids game at a youth group is supposed to be, it gives you opportunity to integrate into each other's lives and try to figure out how to do something together. It's like a puzzle that you don't have to leave on the kitchen table. Yeah.
And just really, really just going back to it really allows you just to use teamwork. And, teams of teams, that's really how everything in the world's kind of broken down. We're just at the end, we're just worker ants, and we need to be able to communicate with each other to accomplish like a common goal, whatever that common goal is. It could be anything. You see like, construction workers using radios, common goal. They're building a road. They need to coordinate. They need different things to come in at different times. Different guys are doing different, jobs on the work site. They all just need to coordinate together off, moving towards a common goal. And with, I guess an intent involved. And so that's all they do. At the end of the day, you're just able to coordinate teamwork. And I've thought through that a little bit. I get a lot of questions about that through email and people calling and stuff. And at the end of the day, that's what I've come up with. I'm not a poet. I wish I was, but that's how I can explain it.
No, it eventually I want to ask you on practical exercises that you think are like not like individuals or small like groups of people can use to sort of confirm their
their setup. Just like that's basically just you definitely want to have a proof of concept. Like you want to make sure that this thing that you got, like you're able to use it into what you want. And when we were talking yesterday, I mentioned that a lot of my experience is going to come from the military, and a lot of my life experience comes from the military. I spent a lot of time in the military, and when I look at that problem, like if I needed to do a proof of concept for communications, like for a simple radio network, one of the hardest tactical tasks to accomplish is a link up. Link ups are really dangerous, especially in like a semi-permissive or non-permissive environment. They're very dangerous. You're putting two groups of armed people together that are looking for other groups of armed people. Everyone's on super high alert. All their senses are they're going 1,000 miles a minute. And so you're trying to link up with somebody that you don't want to blast, basically. And doing that over a radio would be a good proof of concept. So, just getting like your group of guys together, having one guy, say he's like the leader for this exercise, and then him put out information over the net, which when I refer to a net, I'm just talking about, for lack of a better term, just the frequency that you're talking on could be like your net. Just putting out information and trying to get a group of people to link up at a certain time and place under certain conditions. And you could do that without even like LARP, full-blown LARPing, getting your stuff on. You just get a couple radios and a couple cars, or go out in the woods and do some land nav and, meet at a specific location at a specific time under certain criteria. And that is a very good proof of concept for your little internal net that you're using to communicate with your buddies.
So as a proof of concept for communications, so you're going to have to build. This is assuming that you have a plan in place. This is what one way to test that plan is something like, it could look something like, on Saturday we're going to do a link up for a land nav link up test. And so everyone knows that that's what's going to be on Saturday. So they're monitoring the net, they're monitoring the frequency. When they get the blast out, which, you know, you let's say you hit it every 15 minutes between 9 and 10 in the morning on that Saturday, because, you know, Saturday morning cartoons have to happen. But
exactly,
you know, so you finish whatever you finish Saturday morning Power Rangers or whatever it is. And, you know, you get, okay, time, location, uniform, or time, location, signal, you know, like identifying with VS17 panel or something of that sort. And so then everyone on the net, they could Roger up or whatever.
Yeah,
but
acknowledge. They could just acknowledge it, and they could move there. And, you know, you may even, you know, if you're just starting out, you may even want to back it up one step and just do a rock drill, which is like a rehearsal of concept, and just get your buddies all together within, you know, visual range of each other, and just go over a rehearsal. Because a lot of guys, they're just not going to have a lot of experience doing this kind of stuff. So it's very good just to do like the crawl, walk, run, you know, like start off with a rehearsal of concept, you know, then maybe expand that out a little bit just to, you know, rate a couple hundred meters of distance between each other, and then do the final, I guess, validation, which would be just to execute a link up at an unknown time and place. And that way you're exercising a bunch of different stuff at once, but you're really just showing everyone on that net that everyone is capable of doing that. Like, we can like link up. If it gets, you know, if we can find each other, we could pass the correct information over the net. And then from there, what you'll find is you'll just start refining those TTPs. And when I say TTP, I mean like a tactic, a technique, or a procedure. And you just refine that over time. You know, the more you're working together, you're constantly refining these plans, and you can get very complicated with them. You can add, you know, code words and signals that mean different things and all of that stuff, and go over various scenarios. Kind of, you can red team it a little bit. And interject stuff, but the basic would be, you know, just to do a rehearsal of concept and do a little a walking, you know, kind of like a blank iteration, where you're just really refining the concept, and then finally moving on to like a culminating exercise, which would be like a full-blown link up with, like, you know, like you said before, like next Saturday in the morning, we're going to execute a link up. Just be, you know, be prepared to be on like the radio, and we'll do this. Yeah, no,
the thing that I'm kind of, that we're talking about that seems to be quite helpful in as far as like gun cultures. We talked about, you know, a lot of gun cultures moving from just the having of things to the trying to figure out how to do things. And so, to figuring out how to do things better, and figuring out, like, don't get me wrong. Here's an example. Like, I actually don't enjoy camping. It's not my thing. Yeah. Whether you want to blame it on the military or you want to blame it on other things, like I don't enjoy camping, right?
I don't enjoy camping.
But you know what I do enjoy? Going on an elk hunt, or climbing a mountain, or doing some sort of like overlanding trip.
Yeah.
So when it comes to that, I'll camp all day long. If it's gonna allow me to do like a 20,000 mile motorcycle trip, or you know, travel across land to see all these different things. But if it's to just go into the backyard, for lack of better words, I mean, we moved, so the new environment's a little bit different, but it's just not my thing. It's like I don't want to be uncomfortable for 3 days just because I don't want to
be cold and wet just to be cold and wet.
Yeah, look, I too can cook with a cast iron over an open fire, but I can do that anywhere. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just not my. But when it comes to like the challenge of it, completely different. And so it's this kind of the same thing with hiking. Like, I don't like to just go hiking. That's like I kind of want to climb that mountain. Let's go do that.
Yeah,
and that's you know. And so like with the radios thing. With radios as like a communication tool, some of it is actually it's radios are kind of a tricky one in the sense of like it's simpler than we make it sound. But I wonder also how much of that there's just a lot of problems. Like once you figure out the troubleshooting aspect of it, it seems to be a lot simpler. And then yet at the same time, infinitely more capable. And I wonder how much video games has affected that, where like the link up in a video game is simple. You get a blip on your map and then you run at the dot kind of thing. Whereas,
well, I mean, that's, getting, it's getting that simple too on, on, and for like a ground, from a ground force perspective, using some of these enablers, some like ATAC and some of these moving maps that automatically populate, situational awareness icons and they they'll populate different control measures, like graphic control measures, and those are just symbols that the military throws on a map that are part of a common operating language, so that like if I see a certain symbol at a certain place, like I know the difference between there's a symbol for support by fire and that means a certain thing, and there's a symbol for like attack by fire and that means a certain thing to leaders on the ground. And they're just trying to make sure everyone is on the same page. But yeah, it's a lot easier utilizing a lot of that tech to conduct a link up. But when you go back to just going straight, FM comms or simple comms on a frequency without having any of that other stuff, it's a little bit more complicated, and it allows you to exercise a lot more, I guess, a tradecraft into it. And you mentioned before, like using a panel, like a VS-17 panel. And for guys that don't know what a VS-17 panel is, it's just that big orange panel that you see soldiers with. And it's like a orange piece of fabric. And we're using that to signal. We're able to see it from a long distance. So we use that to communicate with each other via visual means.
For you Wisconsin boys, it's a giant bed sheet in like hunter orange.
Yeah.
Basically, like, it's just this big sheet.
I think there's a chartreuse on the backside, if I remember the name of the color correctly, but no one ever uses that color.
It's I have to break it to you. It's not chartreuse. Chartreuse is kind of like a greenish color. It's fuchsia.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Well, I stand corrected. No one ever busts the fuchsia out.
It's the fuchsia that it's like that pink that makes your eyes burn a little bit when you look at it. It's just
so we use that as a visual signal, and we use other things too: mirrors, smoke, flares at nighttime, star clusters, which are basically like shooting. It's like a Roman candle. There's a lot of different signals that mean a lot of different things, and that's when I was talking about how when you refine these tactics, techniques, and procedures, really the sky is the limit. You just have to be on the same page. And at the end of the day, you're just trying to communicate beyond normal sound of your voice.
So if you're going to describe a comms plan, and then how would you describe? First of all, how would you describe a comms plan for, let's just say, a small unit tactic, like a squad level of 6 dudes or 5 dudes, and then. How would you go ahead? Sorry, there's a little bit of delay, but
it's okay. I'm terrible about interrupting. I apologize. Hope it doesn't get annoying for anyone listening.
Oh no, we'll be fine.
So a comms plan for you're talking like a 6-man team. I'm going to break that down. I'm going to change that a little bit to a squad. So a squad, you're going to have 2 fire teams. Which consists of a team leader, which is a rifleman, basically a grenadier, which is going to be a guy that's going to have some type of way to shoot grenades a small distance, whether it's with a grenade launcher on his weapon or it's a handheld grenade launcher. An automatic rifleman, which is going to be like a machine gunner role, light machine gunner role. And sometimes they add another rifleman to fire teams, but typically they stay pretty small. So the team leader is one of the squad leader's maneuver elements. So he's able basically to control these 2 teams. And to do that, a lot of times they're going to use FM to talk to the fire team leader. So between like fire team leader and squad leader, you'll be a radio. And then between the fire team leader and the members of the team, like we talked earlier, the grenadier and the machine gunner, he's usually going to be using visual or audible communication to tell them what to do. So he's screaming or he's using hand and arm signals. And basically a squad communications, and that's super easy because you really just need like one frequency to talk to the different team leaders. And most of the time you're not going to be spread out enough to even use those radios. You'll be able to do a lot of hand and arm signals and visual signals. It starts getting complicated when that squad leader then has to coordinate with these other squad leaders and now his boss. So you get like these nets of nets, and I like to call them teams of teams because they're all mutually supporting each other and they're going after, a overall end state or an intent. They're trying to meet an intent, accomplish a mission, whatever that is. And then it gets kind of complicated. But at the squad level, really easy. You don't need very many radios, and you could mostly rely on hand and arm and visual signals. And that's operating tactically, and if you have to do something like conduct a link up, where you have to do like a recall almost and get all your boys together, then it would, they would all probably need radios, all monitoring at certain times and then listening for certain information that would get them acting in one way or another, moving towards a link up or preparing, the sky is the limit. You really just have to get those basics down and then start expounding on those basics, to whatever end state you're going for.
Yeah, so I think two phenomena that are taking place in our culture right now. One of them was the event of like the 2020 riots, and then what came out of that, and then the other one it would be actually airsoft as kind of a, not to be too on the nose, but both of these examples, both of these events, or both of these phenomena, I'll use. Identified different aspects. One of them was the 2020 riots was the kick in the shorts for a lot of people to like suddenly realize they didn't know how to communicate with each other outside of, they didn't have like a communication plan. It was just kind of assumed. Like I remember sitting on my patio with my laptop open and my phone out, and I could not keep up with the amount of chatter that was going on.
Yeah.
I could not. It was on every platform that I was present on at the time, whether it was Instagram, Twitter, which I wasn't on Twitter, but it doesn't matter. Every platform that I was using, whether it was a physical platform like email, I like social media was a digital platform, but whether it was a phone, I had a phone number. I also had an email address. I also had a Instagram, and I also had I can't remember what else I had at the time, but like, those, and so each one of those was like, the notifications on my phone were more aggressive than like Kylie Jenner's email, just like so I couldn't keep up with all of it, and I had to like sit down and start like immediately just dismiss, answer, dismiss, answer, communicate, group comms into groups, and I had to start grouping all the, like this group of communication was purely political talk, and this group of communication was events in this neighborhood, and this communication was citywide, and this one was, what the president said or whatever, right? And so like, I think that event, the 2020, like especially in Minnesota, but in other places in the country, suddenly being able to communicate with your people and having a comms plan was the value of it was so pungent that you didn't need to like figure it out. You just had to try to figure out how to do it. Yeah. And so you have that end where it wasn't really like the military, because this layout, squad leader, team leader communicate by radio, team leader, teams communicate by hand and arm signals, makes sense when you're already linked up. But our environment now is everyone has mixed capabilities. I mean, I think anyone can get a $50 Baofeng radio. Like anyone can do that. They're super cheap. Have a backup, but it has its limitations, and yet it fits within some people's capability at the time. And when you're in a scenario where, it's less important how, well, I don't want to go, that doesn't make sense. When you're in a scenario where like you need people to do things, you're not worried about who has a Harris L3 and who has this and who has that. So
you're explaining before about getting through the noise, like a real common thing. And, maybe from maybe your perspective in the military, might have been a younger guy and you get your perspective's different. But what you're
very much so.
What you're really trying to do is you're getting a lot of these. You can look at all of those different feeds as information streams or sensors or whatever, however you want to look at them. And you're trying to figure out how to make a decision based off all this information. So you're taking situational awareness and you're turning it into something called situational understanding. And situational understanding is what's going to allow you at your level to make the best decision to accomplish whatever task it is you're assigned to accomplish. So that's a huge issue. I mean, even I can't tell you how many great systems there were, overseas or in the service that a lot of them were just ignored because they were too complicated or they got lost in the noise. When you're talking about going back to the other thing, when you're talking about how do we communicate with these like large groups of people, and people always bring up the Baofeng radio. It's because it's an interoperability thing. I mean, you have a ton of different more expensive radios that have way better capability. And Alex talked about DMR and P25 and these different waveforms that are out there, and they're way more secure and they're way more capable. But are they interoperable? Interoperability is everything.
When you refer to interoperability,
so you need the interoperability just means they work together.
Okay.
So you can't necessarily take a P25, something operating in a P25 waveform and talk to DMR. They just don't talk. There's ways to do it, gateways and other things. But the simplest way to do it is just to get this cheap radio, and that you can use it as an interoperability tool because it's just a simple analog frequency. You can talk to someone else. And then, as things progress or as like capabilities increase, then you can change into different stuff. But really right now, for the amount of proliferation, like the amount that radio is out there, I would say that's like one of the most interoperable radios that's out there. And is it the most secure? No. Is it like the most Gucci radio? No. Is it going to survive when you drop it from 25 feet on the concrete? Maybe. But they're $50 a piece. You can buy a 12-pack. It's not that it's not going to break the bank, and they're extremely interoperable. And that interoperability, it all feeds back into this teamwork thing and teaming of teams and everything else. And you're just going to have something that can talk over a bunch of different frequencies in like a very simple way. It's not up to me to decide whatever your tactics, techniques, or procedures, but I can just tell you that is how I would do it. I would use that radio as a tool in my kit bag. It's just a tool for just the simple fact that it's widely proliferated and interoperable with a lot of other radios.
Okay, so when going back to turning situational awareness into situational understanding, situational awareness for a long time in kind of the gun world has been very focused on the individual. Like, I'm situational aware of my environment. I know that door's open and where the exit is and what this guy's doing, and it's very focused on the individual. But once you start breaking into a team level, or even like overseeing a team or a squad, how does like situational understanding? Well, first of all, can you have situational awareness without situational understanding? And then two, what does that transition look like on a squad level or a platoon level?
I think you absolutely can have awareness without understanding. Because you zoom out twice on the map and things might look drastically different than when you go down to that piece of microterrain that you're fighting over at that particular time. You may not see, over the ridge line, what's going on and what's affecting, just the environment at that time. And so what makes it very important to drive that stuff down is, at every you talked about like that high level stuff from the news and, geographic information and stuff, how does that affect me at this particular moment in accordance with whatever mission I'm trying to accomplish? And that's where like leaders really need to be able to filter that stuff out and give, their subordinates the correct information at the correct time. And it's up to the leader, with a little bit more experience to take that information and decide what is pertinent and what is not pertinent. You wouldn't want, I'm sure when you were running and gunning with third bat, that it wouldn't be helpful to you to have like the battalion logistics net, intelligence and logistics net piped into your ears at all time while you're just trying to get into like building, Alpha 4-3 on like the red side. It doesn't, it's not good for you at that time. What you need to hear is like how exactly you're going to accomplish your little piece, and the leadership is worried about the higher level stuff. And I think a lot of that, at least the service, is built into the planning process, trying to give the just the right amount of understanding of the situation through, paragraph 1 of the battlefield, battle space, whatever you want to call it, operating environment, to everyone as a part of like this operation. So, kind of going back. How do you filter through the noise? However you seem fit as like the leader of that group, and then when you're trying to make your own decisions, hell, I don't know, man. Like there's a lot coming and you're talking, it sounded like you had a whole bunch of stuff, and you just have to use your own, I guess, moral compass to navigate through that stuff and pull out the right information.
So in some sense, you're saying that there isn't really like a definitive rubric in the sense of there isn't like a Bible on situational understanding. It's
no, it's using all of your assets, every asset that you can, to just gain an understanding of what's going on right now in your environment.
Yeah, so orienting the information that you acquire from your environment in pursuit of the goal, like,
exactly.
and that presupposes that you have a stated goal.
Yes.
Okay, and so I think that is one thing, because I've been a veteran for just shy of 10 years, so I've been out of the military for just shy of 10 years, and like that has been one thing that we've brought up a number of times on the show is a pretty chief distinction between current in military and the citizen side of like a gun culture, is that like the military can actually kind of defer to a mission, even if that mission is ill-defined on the top level. Yeah. I can still tell you that my mission as a squad leader is to make sure my boys come home and that we raid that building effectively.
Yeah.
And so training mission is focused on breaching and clearing and comms between the team leaders and the emotional physical, emotional, like not support, but capabilities of my team and so like maybe I'm not thinking on the brigade level, but a squad leader can sit down and say, well, yeah, no, I know what my goals are. My goals are to make my guys more better because we're going to be on a deployment in 3 months. Whereas on the civilian side or the citizen side, that goal, that mission is a lot harder to define, because in some sense we're all battalion commanders without battalions beneath us, and it doesn't. But at the same time, like the reward for figuring that out is so much greater. Well, it's more personal, at least
in the gun culture. I'm a big constitutional guy. Like I'm a firm believer in the Constitution, and I love hearing people who are way more educated speaking, the truth about Constitution and why things are set up the way that they are, and checks and balances and everything. I think what the gun culture kind of lacks a lot of time is what I'd call like a unity of effort. like what are we trying to do all together? There should be one goal. I think it should be to, maintain our right to bear arms and no one getting in our stuff about it, and like no oversight, just go back to the founding fathers' ideas of personal responsibility. And, we're personally responsible at the end of the day for your own security. You're personally responsible for that, and to protect your family, to protect your property. You're personally responsible for that. And I think a lot of times there's so much noise in the gun culture that it gets lost, where you have all of these different organizations going after all of these different goals. And some of them are like conceding things, and some of them are super, I would say, almost trying to gobble up more freedom, which I'm not opposed to. But it seems like there's not really like a unity of effort. It used to, when I was a kid, I used to think like the NRA was like the unity. That's who gave me a sticker when I bought my first, 22 tube-loaded 22 when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And you don't really see that much anymore. It's just kind of all lost in the noise.
Well, I think a lot of like gun culture is no longer being driven by politics, which is perhaps one of the unique things about us in our day and age, is that like there's this phrase that Tim Pool uses, politics is pop culture. So like it's, and what I mean by that is like the political noise that you get in pop culture is so definitive, like whether it's celebrities expressing their views or, music being about some sort of political thing, or like movements being co-opted within political operations, or whether it's brands aligning politically with certain ideologies, or education and this, that, the other. Like, whereas like gun culture, so many other aspects of at least American life have congealed around politics as a whole, especially after 2020, especially after, Donald Trump's very marketed, or not very marketed, very like part of the team, America team thing, kind of branding concept, or the kind of the Democratic hegemony of Black Lives Matter. And so like, but then outside of those political movements, when you look back at like gun culture, I think gun culture is a little bit more unified despite detractors, but gun politics is a little bit more like, there's the Firearms Policy Coalition that's working hard. There's Gun Owners of America. So the politics is a little decentralized. It was very centralized around the NRA, and now it's quite a bit more decentralized, which is good because I think it means that more individuals with that capacity to fight that fight are volunteering and participating instead of going, well, if I want to go fight that fight, I'm going to go work for the NRA. They're like, oh, I'm going to do that. I can choose this. I can choose this. I can choose this. And then the culture, though, is sort of, it's de-atomizing. It's not necessarily what I mean atomizing is like individual uber alles. It's de-atomizing away from, well, everything is about the individual. It's what you want, man. It's kind of like, let's do this together, dude. And that's kind of the shift on the culture side. And the culture is definitely it's
very good to hear guys say we and not I.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes I'll hear someone talk and it's really a breath of fresh air when they start thinking about the team and they're thinking about the country as a whole, because I'm a super proud American, I think it's okay to be proud to be an American. I think our country has gone through so much stuff together, and we're all kind of in this thing together. And, when I was a kid, they used to always talk about like the melting pot, and that always like stuck with me. And I think it's super proud to be proud of our history. It's okay to fight for, politically, and even, if you have to stand up for yourself, for your rights that people, our forefathers really set forth for us in the Constitution. And I think it really irks me when like, it almost seems like people just forget that they hit the jackpot when they became a citizen of the United States. And we should be proud of that. And we should fight hard to defend all of the rights that we have, because it's really what made us into what we are now. And it would be great to hear politicians start talking about that. It's okay to be proud to be an American. You don't have to be on the left, or you can just be an American. You can just go right down the middle. You can do whatever you want. That's the best part of being an American. You have the right to do that. You don't have to fall in line with the party. And I think that the right to bear arms was really fresh in the forefathers' mind, because they just fought a revolution. And they saw the problems that they went through, and they're like, hey, we have to be prepared. I don't think in some of their lifetimes that those people ever thought that they would fight a revolution against the crown, but they did. And they were just trying to set the conditions for success for the country in the future by laying these rules down. And I think when we start infringing on those rules, it's a real slippery slope.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, so like the argument being the founding fathers had a set of virtues and values which they imparted into our governing body, and that governing body, or that they did that through the Constitution and our they did it through the Constitution. And so then so they believed a certain things, like this is true, an individual has this right, this is reality. And because that, we're going to build our government to reflect that reality. And so, so then that's at least how we say that a lot of this started. I think it's interesting to have this idea of like being proud as an American is kind of an odd one. Some of it harkens back to what I think of like what Nietzsche was talking about when he said a man with a why will endure anyhow. And it's like, well, one of the negatives of being born with the victory of the jackpot, it's not the victory, but being born in the country, is that you kind of don't know what you have.
Yeah.
And that's, I am by no means original in saying that, right? Like I'm not some, seance presenting some infinite wisdom. Rather, it's just like, you kind of got to see the world without it, and to see what it's there. And so, I
always talk to with my family and stuff. A lot of my family, mostly have all served in the service. Everyone in my immediate family was in the service. Now my wife's family, not as much. And so they ask a lot of questions about things and what I think about the States compared to overseas and stuff. And it always comes back to in the States you can drive from here back to my hometown in Kentucky on a concrete road without a break in it, and there's gas stations along the way, and people generally follow rules, and it's pretty much a safe trip. If you go to anywhere else in the world that's not like a westernized society or has a lot of infrastructure like the Iraq is not as bad. Afghanistan or in Africa, as soon as you hit that first dirt road, you're like, man, we got it pretty good. We got it pretty good.
We do, but then when it comes to the concept of rights and freedoms and like what this country stands for, I think that there's a term that's been used quite a bit for maybe a couple decades now, like being the culture wars. And at the heart of it is the question of, I think there's a social conflict over it's not even what our culture values, it's what values we want our culture to have. Like, let's be clear, some things that I call good, other people call evil. And so we're not necessarily in a culture war over what our country stands for. It's what is our country going to stand for. Mm-hmm. And you could break that down pretty far into like equity and communism and socialism and these different individual liberties.
I'm by no means a political expert. I don't claim to be, but I do follow is the moral compass that my parents put into me. And and you know, that a lot of that stuff is just that, you know, I'm proud of what we've all created together, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud, you know, to say that, you know, we started from a revolution and we've gotten to where we are, you know, a global superpower. And everyone did that together. You know, there's millions of people that have small pieces in that. And I think it's amazing where we've come in such a short period of time. And I think that's something that, you know, everyone should be proud of. You know, everyone should have that inside and be proud of that. You know, we've gone through trials and tribulations, and there's been good times and bad times. But at the end of the day, you know, we're still all Americans and really looking out for each other. We're just kind of moving forward, you know. And you're right, like the ship, the proverbial ship, you know, that everyone's on changes course left or right every once in a while. But I think it's important to just stay on the bearing of the Constitution while we're doing this. And it's important for people that understand, not understand, but it's important for people just to know their rights and really do everything they can to prevent any infringement on those rights. Because then that infringement starts just, you know, you give someone a penny, and before you know it, they've got dollars, and then they've got hundred. You know what I mean? And you've lost. You wake up and you're like, "What happened?" You know?
Well, let's take an example that's a bit more personal to you, right? Is that like so you spent time in the military, and if you look through history and you look at different ways that countries have handled like military officers, you know, where you can go the Roman route, where like they kind of force retire. There's generals who were forced retired their guys into luxury. So they basically ended the lines of like, not secession, but ended the lines of, ended the cycles of, assassinations and issues like that. Like, you know, instead of trying to kill all his generals, he just like, okay, you're all going to be, or maybe I think this was actually in China.
Resigned. Yeah, they resigned. Yeah.
You know, but there was another one. I was reading 48 Laws of Power, which is kind of a tricky book. You know, but then needless to say, like, it's an interesting one to read for sure. My verdict is not out on it yet, but there is this. The point being said is you spent time in the military. You retired from the military. You didn't retire in the what do you call it? The codulation, which is a word I don't know if it exists, but the codulation of luxury. Like, okay, you've done your time in the military. Here's, you know, you're going to go live and bask in bathing houses with grapes served to you, so that you're no longer a threat to the future generations or whatever. Yeah. Rather, it's like, so you took a set of skills that you had and noticed and identified a need within the market. Let's call it this, you know, the market of like, well, I can buy a radio and I can buy a headset, but I can't connect those two. Yeah. And so you built a business off of that, which is one of the examples of I think in Western society, things taken for granted. Because in some countries you can't, because the government will confiscate that. And in other countries you can't, because there's no like the idea of being capable of communicating over a radio is already perceived as intent for bad action. Yeah. Whereas in our country, we have different. I mean, it's not universal. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that every country in the world's a third world country that's all falling apart and dystopian. But like, it's not exactly a uniquely American concept, but it's definitely the way that I'm looking at it, in the sense of, well, you took a skill set that you learned from the military, you developed it into a business, and then now you're able to run that business with employees where you're adding value. You're at least adding value to 3 people's lives, which, if you can be a net positive, congratulations. You know, so I look at the service just as that, you know, and that was always in my family. That's how it was, is the service, you know, it's what you gave to it. It's not what they give to you. You do it as a service. Like, you
you did it to give back to your community, to your country. That's what you did. You know, you don't do it looking for a handout. You know, you don't do it looking for anything other than this is going to suck. I could die doing this, but you know what? I'm doing this because I feel like I need to give back to this country that's given so much and to so many different people. And that's the way that I look at my service. I did get a lot of skill sets, you know, had a lot of operational training, you know, just experience. And yeah, and I was able to leverage that into another career. And, you know, one of the bigger reasons I did that is because like I needed a transition plan when I got out, because I didn't want that to define me, the service. I'm super proud of it, and I will talk about it. People ask me, you know, when I get around other Army guys, I will start BSing about the service, and I do enjoy talking about it. But I'm trying not to make that, you know, define me. You know, it was something that I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for the benefits that I got. I'm thankful for all that stuff, but I really did it just to give back to the country. When I joined, and I think when you joined, it was a little bit different time. We were all super pissed still about September 11th, and a lot of us wanted to get after it, and everyone had their own experiences while they did it, but we did it as a service. You know, I think at the end of the day, we did it just to give back to the country. I don't want to get too far off into politics and stuff, because I'll talk and talk and talk about it. But
I mean, I've got time, but I know that you're on a bit of a clock. Well, then, like summarize a little bit of that, because the idea of service is tricky, right? It's not tricky. It's like I joined the military. There was a part of me that, let me rephrase this. The general reason why I joined the military was because I wanted to go see war. Like, it was very much so. I unfortunately, for better and for worse in my scenario, very much so approached it as not so much out of patriotism or like a duty to the country. It was very much so I wanted to see this thing that we were doing and see it for myself. I wanted to see and I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't want to just read about it. I didn't just want to like watch Mogadishu. I didn't want to just watch Black Hawk Down. Yeah. I wanted to go see it and see what was going on. And then
I think a lot of guys have that perspective, and I think I did a little bit too. Like, I really wanted to experience combat. You know, I heard the stories, I'd seen the movies. I wanted to experience it. And the only thing that I can say really about combat is just be careful what you wish for. Because it's a lot of fun, man. Sometimes it's a lot of fun, and I won't, man, when you have a well-trained organization and all everything's turning and guys are getting after it and they're showing, you know, I've seen guys that are just fearless. I've seen guys that are just doing these incredible things, putting themselves just in these extreme danger. But when you start looking at, you know, black bracelets start piling up, you just should, you know, be careful what you wish for. I think that war should be the final answer. And I think that before we commit, I mean, this is my personal opinion. I think that before we commit to anything that is kinetic like that, where we're putting guys and gals' lives in danger, that I think that American people should be it should be so important that they look at their kids and they're like, it's worth their life. I mean, that's how important it should be before we commit militarily. Because that's the fact is guys get hurt, lives get ruined. I talk a lot about, I brought this up to a buddy of mine. We're talking about our careers. We were just down in Texas. And I was like, you know, it's like an amazing novel with just kind of a sad ending. like this book that you can't put down. But when you're done with it and you look back on it, there is a lot of stuff that is just terrible. Lives get ruined, guys' families fall apart. People die, friends that I would love to chat with, they're not here anymore. And in my mind's eye, they're still sitting in the team room back at work, they're 25 years old, they're still getting after it, but I think it's just the combat side of it and the separation from friends and family and the added stressors of just being a soldier or in the military as general. It's tough. And the only way I could put it in words is like, it's a great book with like just the ending is just when you come to terms with it at the end and you really ponder on it and think about it. It's kind of sad. There's a lot of good times in that book, a lot of good scenes, and a lot of times you'll be reading the chapter and cracking up or whatever. But when you get to the end, when you're kind of putting it all together, you look back on it, you're like, man, was it really, really, really worth it? If I had to go back, would I trade, a Brand or a Dick Meyer or any of these guys? Would I trade them for the end state we're at now? And I don't know. I don't know. It's certainly not my decision, but I don't know if I would personally. But going back to, kind of talking about radios more. Right now, we're at this golden age of the two-way radio. I think that the radios that are out now, this is the last generation we'll ever see like a tactical radio in its form right now. Like the brick, the M-bitter, the 152, the 163, all these radios. I think that the next generation of radios will probably be akin to just a cell phone. I think it'll just be very simple. It's what a tricorder is, that what they called it on Star Trek, the tricorder. You click it, you can talk across the universe, kind of thing. I think that it's moving that way pretty fast.
Is that because of like technological capability?
Tech is definitely catching up. And what we've talked about cell phones. Cell phones are radios. Mm-hmm. And so when you have that much, it's a huge market. There's a bunch of money to be made. There's a ton of innovation. So as the civilian side starts innovating more and more and more, it's almost the opposite of the military there in the Cold War, where the military was developing all of this tech and it trickled down into the civilian side. It's almost the opposite with communication stuff, because it's moving forward so rapidly on the civilian side that the military is really trying to catch up. Cell phone is like the most powerful radio you can have in your kit bag, like bar none.
So when you're saying that, just to be clear, are you talking about just simply the cell phone, or the idea of like a digitally transmitted radio?
I'm talking about the cell phone in general. I mean, it's connected to tons of different networks at once. It works all over the place. It's pretty wild, the infrastructure that's built up behind it. And just the amount of users that you can have, the different stuff that you can do with it, just getting access to the internet, and using data for all sorts of stuff. It's just completely, changing the game for tactical communications.
No, absolutely, with like the ATAC system and being able to I keep a chest mounted phone on my kit, and so I have got an ATAC and an ITAC kind of system running, and that's been hugely helpful as far as like it is a useful tool as long as you don't tunnel vision down into the map. But that happens a lot. Guys will tunnel into those ATAC and get in, lose their. But you have I'm sorry, but like you have a way of using your cell phone, because like I can't. You have a way of. You have a tool, don't you guys have a tool where I can like link my phone up to my
Sordens or my Peltors?
Yeah, we made like a Bluetooth enabler to pull in the Bluetooth, capability into your tactical headset, which was, it had been done before, but it hadn't been done in a way that we did it, and we just basically wanted to be able to pull in that tool. And that's more for guys. We're looking at it from a lot of different perspectives. The idea started from me. I just wanted to be able to listen to to music while I was like on a long infill or in the back of a truck on a huge ground assault convoy or something. And
oh yeah,
it takes forever. I wanted to listen to some music or audiobook. And as we started wargaming here and planning for the product, we brought in, what if a guy wants to keep, he only has one down lead on his headset and he wants to keep his radio on with it. How are we going to do that? So we have the it's called the Discus. We have it can detect the radio traffic that would be coming up to your headset, and it'll adjust the level so that the radio traffic gets priority, things like that. A lot of first responders are using it for initial coordinations. Because of that term we talked about before, interoperability. So in some municipalities, you can't talk to the city next door because they're on a different radio system. So a lot of the LE are showing up and they're having to coordinate because they have to, use teamwork to accomplish these tasks. So they'll hop on with a Discus and call that next municipality and open up a line of communication. But that's what that was for. And yeah, you can absolutely use it for that guy. A lot of guys like them, and they use them to link into their cell phone and pull that into their network, for lack of a better term, or communications network.
Yeah, no, it just looked like, oh, now I don't need to use my radio. I can just call you, and whether it's range theatrics or whatever.
Yeah, no, you can, you can definitely do that, but it goes back into the other thing too, like with that infrastructure, it depends on infrastructure. And that's something that a normal two-way radio doesn't need infrastructure, it uses its infrastructure is, the RF spectrum. It's there. It's always there. So they're all just different tools in your kit bag to circle back to enable teamwork.
Okay, so when we were talking earlier about a comms plan, what I thought of when I think of the word comms plan is basically like primary, secondary, tertiary, layered versions of comms, like primary cell phone, secondary is radio, third is visual.
Yeah.
And so, and each one of those things has different, when you're talking about the individual capabilities of a team, a unit, a squad, a platoon, a government for that matter, require different pieces of equipment to make it work. Like you can't have a radio comms without a radio. Okay. But then you want to consider antenna, and then you want to consider your PTT and your down leads and your headsets. And so,
and all that, and all that stuff is just nice to have. It's not a need to have, you can just do it with just a radio with no other accessories, but if you start running into problem sets you're trying to fix, like I need to be able to manipulate things with my hands while using this radio at the same time. And that turns into, okay, well now I'm going to need a remote switch, which is a push to talk. That's a little bit out of the way, I could put it in a different position on my body, and I'm going to need, I might need a different, type of antenna. I might need to move my antenna to get it out of my face. Things like that. These are all, all that stuff is just an enabler. It's not like the end item. The end item is just like that basic radio. So when you're talking about these, this planning, you mentioned like primary, secondary, tertiary. We usually call that like a PACE plan. Yep. So primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And, PACE plans aren't all inclusive. A lot of times, especially in recce, because so much of your stuff revolves around long range communications, your PACE plan can change based off what part or what phase of the operation you're in. And that's when, the leaders have to get together and start looking at, what what's going on during these different phases of the operation. Do we want to communicate via, FM on infill, or is that going to give away, is there a possibility that we could have some kind of enemy electronic warfare, either like intercept or DF our communications and find out that we're coming? That's just stuff that you got to think about. So you would just, make a quick little pace plan, and in war game, use your brain, your most powerful tool, to kind of think through what you need to do and kind of think how the adversary would look at that, whatever the adversary is. I mean, you could even think as the weather as an adversary, what's going on and what do we need to change at what point in the operation. And, that just gets, all that stuff gets, go down a rabbit hole and gets super complicated, but you really just need to remember that you need just a simple pace plan.
So a pace plan would look like something like during infiltration or movement to target. The primary method of communication is going to move away from radio.
Yeah,
we're gonna have an and it'll be encrypted radio on this channel because we're concerned about moving through areas with ambushes. So, we're concerned about moving through areas with ambushes. So we want to stay on an encrypted channel. We're not going to be in an open channel. Fine.
Yeah. And that's just a real simple, real simple way of like looking at it, just like what are you trying to accomplish during this like phase or this part, this, or, whole operation or whatever. And then like, what am I doing to like mitigate those risks to me? What am I doing as far as my posture to mitigate all of those risks? You're never going to be able to take those risks down to zero. All right. The USS Missouri is always going to be able to drive up and broadside you, like you can't plan for every contingency.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
You just kind of look at it with using common sense and be like, okay, what makes sense for us during like this operation, this particular phase, or where we're operating at now? What makes sense, and you could say, for instance, I see a lot of going back to Mojave talking about like the hate that gets thrown on that low Baofeng radio. I mean, that's, you need to do is put in some simple control measures, like with the pace plan, like, hey, we're not using this radio to communicate during this phase of the operation. You can have a radio turned on. You don't have to push to talk. You can just listen. Like you were only going to receive traffic during this phase of the operation, unless like this criteria is met. And a lot of that goes into at what point does the disadvantage of you using a plain text radio outweigh the advantage let me rephrase that. At what point does the advantage you would get from being able to like communicate outweigh the disadvantage of someone being able to directional find you? Like, for instance, like if you're on an objective and you're already shooting and things and people know you're there, what is the disadvantage of you communicating? What does that give the enemy that you haven't already given them by announcing your presence by raiding his village, whatever that is?
Yeah, like I could think of examples of like if you're already in an engagement, or you're let's just say a pace plan would look something like this. Primary is going to be encrypted. Alternative is open, but open with code words. And so that I'm not giving. You may try to use code words over the encrypted radio, but when you're not using the encrypted radio, it's phase line alpha. That's all it is. Like,
yeah. And so when he says phase line alpha, he's talking about, these are control measures, we call them. So like everyone's on the same sheet of paper, so that if someone hears that, X person is crossing phase line alpha, everyone in their mind's eye knows that, okay, this guy is like crossed this threshold on a map, basically.
I know where you're at on the map. Okay, cool.
Exactly. Yep.
So then when you say directionally find, that can mean two things. But while it can mean
kind of discerning your location through your communication. Like if I'm listening to a guy talk on a radio and he's set up like an urban hide, and I'm hearing him describe the Sears Tower or whatever it is. Like I know there's only so many buildings.
You're talking about two different things.
Okay. Direction finding is usually signal.
Direction finding is basically, there's a bunch of different ways to do it, but you're basically finding the origin of a signal.
Okay.
You're finding an origin of a signal. And one of the common ways that you see guys doing it, and I follow a guy called Terminal Armament. I don't know him from anybody, but he puts out some, I guess, real low level, what you can do at home ways to do direction finding. He does it with like directional antennas, which are called Yagi antennas, which are highly directional in the way that they work, to basically use a triangulation to figure out an origin of a signal. There's other ways that you can do it based off of, like if you had two receiving stations that were using like GPS timing and they could communicate with each other. You could measure, because radio waves, they travel at a constant, which is the speed of light. It's 186,000 miles per second. They could measure the difference in the time that it took a signal to get to each receiver, do some math, and then come up with a location. And that can happen very quickly. I was looking back, trying to find some on-sensitive stuff that had been like released. And, there in this late 60s, I found some stuff that was released that, it's like 100 milliseconds to DF someone using some of these techniques way back then. So you can imagine now with computing power increasing so much, how fast you can find a signal. So that's different than interception. So interception would be, I have got your signal and now I can listen to what you're saying.
Okay.
And that opens up like a whole another can of worms, So if you're encrypted, it's harder to intercept, but you can still definitely direction find.
Okay.
You just can't tell what they're saying. You can just see that they are transmitting in an area, and depending on what system you're using to do it, it can be like a big area or down to like a very small area that's like targetable. And that's when you really need to know your operating environment and like what threats are there, and then base your pace plan off of those threats.
So going back to like a bit of like maybe even like a video game reference, like we see it, and I'm using this one a bit because how we understand so much of culture, it's not like how much we understand so much of culture is coming from video games, but it's like it's a way to try to comprehend something, as in like, oh, this correlates to reality, or this doesn't correlate to reality. And a good example, or an example I'm thinking about is like with radios. If you're working in a savvy environment, like one of the advantages of using, or one of the things that we encountered in Afghanistan was that the cells that we were engaged with were using unencrypted radios, and they didn't believe, for whatever reason, that many times we encountered that they didn't believe that we could hear them, or we could understand what they were saying, or they didn't consider that. And it's not like every single example was the same thing, and as a result, we used both directional finding and compromised their signal multiple times. Like, they're bringing a DISCO. Okay, we know where to, and we can kind of figure that stuff out. Whereas, like in our world, if you're working in our environment in an urban or even suburban metropolis, I guess the question would be, how much effort do you need to spend in masking your signal if you're right? Because like, is it such an extent that the proliferation of directional finding capability and technology is so prevalent that even transmitting a Baofeng radio in an inner city environment is immediately going to identify your location on, like multiple nets? Or is it still someone has to pick your signal through the noise and then target that?
Yeah, I think it's that. I think it's the second part. And I think
Okay.
I think that they could, but you have to think like a lot of these assets that are out there. They're not like how would I explain it? It's like instead of having like a broad 180 degree view, a lot of them to be very effective are more like microscopes. Like you'd have to be looking at a very specific geographic location to like pick it out. And when you talked about earlier, like hiding in the signal, it's really smart. Like you should just hide in the noise. And that's where I think like the cell phone thing comes into, especially when a ton of people are using them. It's pretty effective to hide into the noise. If you were operating in an environment where there was 50 guys with Baofeng radios, let's just say, and they're talking like on a GMRS or MERS I don't know if that's even legal to do on those radios, but they're talking on a MERS or GMRS frequency.
I mean, if they all have their. I mean, for all legal intents and purposes, the question. I'm not really worried about like the legality of it.
Yeah, no. What I'm saying,
but let's
is
assuming that they figured out how to do it legally because you have your ham radio, right?
You're talking on all these. You got all these guys talking on these nets. And then all of a sudden, someone starts transmitting some more exotic waveform, and it just sticks out, and so that's going to attract attention. And that's where really, you can apply the same techniques that you would apply to maybe camouflage to like your spectrum silhouette, for lack of a better term. So you can, blend in. You want to blend in with the noise. You want to make sure that you don't have your silhouette showing. You want to break up your silhouette. You can apply a lot of those same fundamentals, and really the easiest way to do that with the handheld radios is to turn the power down as low as possible. Because every time you press the push to talk and transmit, you're essentially shooting a tracer straight up in the air. And it's up to you to decide whether it's worth shooting a 50 cal tracer straight up or a 22 long rifle.
Fair.
And the signal is going to be there regardless. And somebody who just has enough time, effort, and money, they're going to find you. But it's up to you to make that as hard as possible. And you can, do a lot of different stuff, terrain masking, putting a mountain between you and them. And that in Afghanistan, that's a lot of what the Taliban were doing. They were using terrain masking, and they needed to communicate. They needed to use teamwork. So they looked at and I don't want to be naive about the Taliban at all. Like, they are extremely intelligent, maybe not the most educated people, but there are some very smart Moduns fighting over there.
For sure.
And they basically said, well, the advantage that we're giving the enemy by letting them hear this stuff does not outweigh, or the disadvantage we're getting does not outweigh the advantage of us being able to coordinate over these, Afghanistan is the tyranny of time and distance. You could see the mountain, but it's going to take you 35 hours to get a platoon over there. It's that kind of thing. So that's what they were doing. I also saw some very, they're just thrifty, using a lot of repeaters.
For sure.
We did when I was with the 101st, I was a Pathfinder in the 101st Pathfinders. And I would look at a lot of missions that were coming down to the Combat Aviation Brigade, and a lot of them were going out to destroy repeaters. Like, they would find repeaters, and it was very easy for us to see the repeater, and we'd destroy it. And what they would do is they just put another repeater up. But that's how they were doing like their longer range hauls. They were turning the power on their own ICOMs like really low, and then using that repeater on super high power, and the repeater just by itself. And, they destroy a big deal. We're not giving up anything. And then we would destroy that repeater, and then they would just put another one in, and it was the never ending cycle. And they would use like Taliban brevity, like you talked about, with code words. I heard them call us like monkeys, and I heard them, say, all sorts of stuff referring to us. And they would refer to different weapon systems as different like animals and different, they're just stupid codes. But they were trying to do that. to take away some of the advantage we had of interception. I don't think for a second that they thought that we couldn't listen to their radio. It was like they 100% knew. They would use that as a deception operation a lot as well. They would say they were going to do things to watch our action.
Yeah.
And then not do them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think we definitely encountered mixed levels of, I wouldn't say awareness, but like definitely mixed levels. Like we did encounter some people that had no idea that we were listening to them.
Yeah.
Like at all. And then there were other people that were much more savvy. And that's just the way of it. Not everyone's operating on the same level. And there's something that I was thinking about. This is kind of where this is going with, kind of tying these two concepts together is, when, are you familiar about like the SIGINT operations that were taking place during the Kenosha riots?
I've read a little bit about the stuff and the assets they had, like flying and stuff like that. Yeah, I've read a little bit, just like open source stuff.
Yeah, so like one of the concerns that we had in Minneapolis when those kind of events were happening were, let's just say, people using the chaos of the already existing riots as noise for them to participate in much more nefarious activities.
Yeah.
Right. So like we weren't necessarily worried about like a dirty bomb or like some sort of, mass cal situation. I know the media trumped up, which is probably no longer a term we can use, but this idea that like this trucker was trying to drive a tank of petroleum into the middle of a protest and ignite it and something like none of that was ever true. And it was, I'm over exaggerating the over exaggeration of the media representation of it. And come to find out, it was a guy who was not familiar with the area who basically got stuck on the 35W or on the bridge and was like in kind of a state of panic because he had an already explosive vehicle on a bridge with a bunch of people, and he was afraid that they were going to use it as an explosive. And it's all this like he said, she said stuff. But the concern on the Minnesota side or the Minneapolis side was like, we saw suddenly the immense potential for people with vendettas to make them happen. And are very thankful that for the most part, not much of that did take place, or at least wasn't presented publicly. And yet then we also saw something like on the Kenosha side, we found out that there were air assets gaining intel or gathering information on all of the people present, which kind of, I don't know the legality of it. It was at least morally dubious in the way that it was presented, but that's kind of the situation I'm thinking of is like both of those are really good scenarios to talk about radio communications, because both of those scenarios were very gray area arenas where like there were bad actors, there were people participating, there was a lot of noise. And so whether you're an individual or a police organization trying to be able to sort through that or hide in it when necessary. Yeah. It's such a, like, that's exactly the scenario I'm thinking of. I'm not thinking
it's very complicated. So if just say me, if I was worried, this is just Josh talking. If I was worried about someone, like I was significantly worried about them intercepting my communications, and I thought that them intercepting my communications would put me at a big disadvantage, I would turn my radio off.
Okay.
And that's really easy. And that's literally like, that should be like step one, to anyone, because, you read a lot about all this stuff and you're trying to figure out how to defeat it, and you don't need it. It's not that complicated. You just look at it tactically. What if I don't want the enemy to use a piece of terrain? What am I going to do? Or I'm going to try to use terrain denial. I'm going to block them using obstacles. I'm going to put in a defense. I'm going to do all that stuff. If I want to deny someone to use the spectrum against me, I'm just not going to operate in it. I will turn my radio off.
And that's what a comms plan accommodates for. Is if I need to communicate with, say, my family, that it could be as something as like the secret handshake or the secret knock on the door. Like,
you know,
So you've heard, everyone has seen Red Dawn. Like we all love Red Dawn. Childhood favorite.
Guilty. I have not seen the whole thing.
Well, I mean, it's if you, I guess you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's kind of cheesy now when I go back and look at some of this stuff. But there's a particular, there is a scene in the movie where they have a radio and they're listening to it, right? And they start passing off code over this radio, and they're just listening on like an AM radio or something, and they say like, John has a long mustache, the chair's against the wall. And that was it was kind of like a tip of the hat to some World War II stuff that happened where we were announcing the invasion was going to happen to the French resistance and telling them to start acting on all these pre-laid plans. And you can do the same thing with your own net. Like one of the common terms that we use in the service when we think our net is compromised is, scuba diver. That's it's a pro word, and it'll just change our posture, whatever it is. We could turn our radios to a different frequency, or we could stop transmitting, only receive. And that's all based off of, what your group has put together as the plan.
Mm-hmm.
So, absolutely. You could have a set of code words that only you and your friends know, and they're pro words. They mean certain specific things. You could come up and say it. You could blast it out in a text message. You could do whatever, and then people will just start executing whatever that task is on there, going to an alternate means of communication, or you can go into all sorts of tradecraft stuff. Tradecraft, a lot of people associate that with like spycraft, but I'm just talking about being like communications techniques. You can use that pro word to start doing a whole bunch of different stuff, and it's up to the operators to really come up with that, their internal plans. But yeah, going back to if I really was like in a high threat environment and I knew that, I would just deny them that terrain. I would just turn the radio off, or just monitor the radio, just not use it as a transmitter.
Yeah. So that, because that would make sense. I think because we saw on the Minnesota side the concern for people to hide in the noise to kind of do bad things, and then on the Kenosha side we found out later that it would have been like people who were doing the right thing could have been targeted by malicious actors within an organization because they could be painted as and targeted as malicious actors by an organization based on the fact that they communicated in some way. And it's like, okay, well, it's something to be aware of. It's not paralyzing, but if and how you solve it is you incorporate that into your comms plan and changing it.
Usually that would be like you're down towards the bottom, like your contingency or your emergency is like your, what's that thing for going back to video games? What's the dude's call sign? He says he's going black. That's that's it. You're off you're not operating on there anymore. You're not emitting. You're not doing anything. And that's all really just basic comms planning, and I think a lot of the guys in our community, if they start looking at this just more with their tactical mindset that they kind of already have, it's really easy to just apply those fundamentals to the spectrum. And that's really all you have to do. And that's the best it's going to get. There's going to be times and places where you're just going to be outmatched. And there's really nothing you can do, but you might as well give yourself every advantage as possible.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. So an objective, one thing that's a goal worth accomplishing is being able to confidently write out a comms plan. Yeah. Like you're definitely. Do you have any? Would you recommend? Are there any resources, either whether it's like field manuals or just like books or places to go that help develop the tradecraft of communications?
Yeah, a lot of it, is going to be based off of your experience. Doing it more and more, linking up with your buddies, talking more and more. On the radio, getting comfortable with it, and just thinking of outside the box on how to use this tool to your advantage. But a lot of the technical stuff is definitely out there just to be picked up. And I like to tell people, just like I think I saw Grantham say this, the Army manuals are free and you can have as many as you want. They're public record. A lot of that stuff is just open distribution. You paid for as part of your tax dollars to get in there and read it. The stuff that's not, public, open for, world distribution, is you can't find it. You can find old ones, but the new ones are pretty good about keeping locked behind like a CAC or a common access card firewall or something like that. But you can go to it's called the Combined Army Registry is one place that I go a lot. And it's a website, DoD website, and there's a search bar, and you can type in pretty much anything, and you can see all of the manuals and all of the resources that are there for soldiers. You can't access some of it because some of it does have, it's like for official use only. I think that's the highest level classification that is on there. But you can definitely get into some of the basics. There's the RTO radio telephone operator manual from Afghanistan is on there that they made that talked about a lot of the issues we were having operating in the mountains. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of just a lot of those field manuals will get very you have typically three types of communications in the military. You have tactical communications, operational communications, strategic. Those all have different goals, but most of those manuals have a fairly good section on tactical communications, which is going to be what we would kind of put together as what we would see as communications from an individual standpoint. Mm-hmm. But those are definitely up for grabs. Highly recommend you go there and just check those out. And can be a little boring, and in field manuals, it took me almost an entire career to get to the point where I was understanding a lot of the concepts that were in there. But man, sometimes I read some of them and I have some real aha moments. I'm like, man, the guys that wrote this were pretty smart. A lot of thought was put into this. So yeah, definitely recommend that. There's a lot of great guys on Instagram that post, very insightful little tidbits. Some of them may be super high level and kind of out of depth, but I think there's why comms are down is one of them, and there's 18 Reco puts out some stuff and some memes, and the Communicator is another guy who puts out some good stuff. I see Mojave puts out a lot of good stuff on their social media channels. So yeah, the stuff is definitely out there. I would say the most important thing though is just getting your own experience with it. You can read about basic rifle marksmanship till the cows come home, and you may be able to grasp some concepts, but until you actually get your, you talked about that cheek weld or that buttstock in your shoulder the other day. I was listening to that podcast. Until you do it, you don't, you can't really master that craft, I guess.
Yeah, it's a discussion that is come up with, I think, in our day and age that I'm going to I think this is the best time I can kind of present it is the argument over CQB is a little bit over in the sense of there was a time where, and it wasn't too long ago, in fact, probably 6 or 7 years ago, where the general understanding was that CQB was something for professionals that the civilian population didn't have any reason to know. Yeah. And it was there were definitely outliers, but the issue being is that there was this body of information, and you see it come up in vestiges from time to time, that needed to be kept protected for professional use only. But by now, I think the mentality is much different in the sense of, yeah, I can understand the theory of CQB all day long, but that doesn't mean I can do it. That doesn't mean that I can implement its principles on the ground, on the fly, with great capability. Now, somebody who's trying to, say, protect that information from being released to the general public might believe that what they're doing is they're defending their tactical advantage, but what they're actually ending up doing is, well, maybe you could say a method of infringement, but what they're ending up doing is they're mistaking that the skill in the ability is very different than the information and the ability and the information on the subject. And so I might know that, say, an American military unit is going to train all of their guys to immediately clear the corners and therefore not stand in the corner. but that doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to defeat the mechanism well executed. There's no part in any sort of CQB there's no part of CQB that isn't inherently dangerous. It just is dangerous. Stop trying to think it could be otherwise. You can't make it safe by making people ignorant. They're just going to rig the house with explosives, which is, now you're dealing with a whole different problem. So, so there's this very like communications concept. I'm sorry. There's this like practice version of there's the intellectual concept of understanding a thing, like communications techniques and tactics and this idea of being able to do something. And then there's the practice skill of being able to do it. Now, rights certainly apply to the information on this concept, and we protect situationally specific information for various reasons. Some right, some wrong, some moral, some immoral. We can discuss that on another day. But we do recognize that just because we can comprehend a subject doesn't mean that we can perform it excellently. And so something that it behooves us as individuals, no longer in the military, but still citizens of this great country, is that behooves. I just used an army word. It behooves us to become skilled in the application of communications techniques, not because we're trying to prepare for the Wolverines moment, but because it inherently makes us more robust.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm glad you brought that, civilian side. I've learned a lot from watching civilian shooters. I was, I took some courses while I was in where they were showing video of, guys from Treks. And I didn't even know who they were. I wasn't in on social media and stuff back then, but he was, already kind of blowing up. And I was like, man, this guy is a machine. And, just through emulating and just watching, there are guys that are subject matter experts in this stuff that have never served in the military. And I think there is a real, there's a real opportunity to learn from each other, learn from genuine subject matter experts in all sorts of different fields. And your service, it could turn you into an SME and you can learn a lot, but you always need to be open to learning from other people. And I think like the information hoarding, as I would call it, some of it, you're right. Like it absolutely does protect,
I can think of
operational techniques that the U.S. uses to gain a advantage over its foes, right? But some of that stuff is like overly done. Like this stuff is just out there. But that a lot of that for the communication side goes into like electronic warfare and signals intelligence. That's like those are the things that you just don't talk about. But the general ideas behind it, we can absolutely talk about, and guys can figure out their own ways to get to their desired end states, whatever that is, using like commercial technology, stuff that's out there, SDR and things like that. Guys just have the light bulb go off that this is a thing and I can use this to gain some type of an advantage over whatever situation that I'm in. Then, it's just good to have that stuff in your skill set as like a prepared dude, a guy that can just handle a lot of different situations. It's good just to have a little bit of info about a lot of stuff in your kit bag to make good decisions when the time comes, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think we spend a lot of time. I think we spend a little bit too much time trying to justify why we're doing what we're doing, which is. But when I'm saying it is like justifying it, like I will admit that it is a difficult question to answer. Absolutely, like the why of being night vision capable may not be. The why of being night vision capable may not be as like inherently on the nose obvious. Like but the opposite side of that, or the on the one hand, one extreme, you have basically absolute white level ignorance. And when I mean white level, I mean like Cooper's color code kind of thing. Like I'm going to live my life
in extreme comfort and ignorance, and that is my primary objective. And there are people who exist in that world, and so be it, right? Like, you've made your bed, go live in it. And then you have the other end, which is every decision that I make in my life is entirely pointed at some potential apocalypse. And it's a never-ending evolution of like the new apocalypse. And you could even say like to the level of potential schizophrenia of this, like, whatever you're talking about. And so, you know, like, not everybody is Noah kind of thing, Noah with the flood. But approaching every scenario and every situation and decision in your life as if you're Noah building the boat is a little bit, is the other kind of end of the spectrum where, well, you know what? The sad answer is it's not the sad answer. The perhaps true but less comforting answer, kind of like, well, I won't go down that road, is that sometimes being capable of a thing is in itself a justification. Is that like, it's like building a hobby. Like it is trying to figure out how to do this better. But then in that way, we're trying to figure out how we contribute to our own community as well, our own culture, our own participation. And sometimes disasters give certain people opportunities to participate. And another one is, well, I can chase comfort or I can chase capability. And sometimes you can't do both. And so it's not really, it's like, trust me when I say it, it doesn't sound very like warm and fuzzy on the inside. But I'm not really here to justify, I'm not really here to argue why we should be able to do it. I'm trying to figure out how to do it better.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think we've gone over some real good basics, you know, establishing like a pace plan, you know, just figuring out how to link up with your buddies, you know, figuring out just some standardized situations that you would change, like your posture, and kind of looking at the situation more, instead of it being like this separate part of, for lack of a better term, like your you know, I don't want to use that phrase. I use a lot of military stuff as a part of your like tactical plan, a separate part of it, just incorporating it into it, because it's a part of, I mean, it's there. So I think once you get those basics down, you're good. You can come up with a pretty solid plan, you know. The technical side of it will come, you know, through experience, you know, like you'll figure out that you need a different antenna because this is not working as well, or like this, you need to operate at a higher power, or, you know, maybe this part of the spectrum is not as good as another part of the spectrum where you're at to communicate over long distances. And that is just what you get after exercising all of this stuff over, you know, a time. It's just going to take a little bit of time and training, just like, you know, rifle marksmanship would. You're going to have to invest a little bit of time, and you're going to have to get some reps in just to figure it out. And a real good way, you know, and a lot of the guys hate on the ham community, but a real good way to gain some operational experience is to join a ham club. I mean, they might not look at things as the same perspective as you do or as I do. But the fundamentals there are very sound, and those guys are very good at communicating very efficiently, you know, using like the least amount of power over the greatest distance. And there's a lot of guys that have a lot of skill set there that you could definitely leverage. And also, you know, I've been kind of surprised that a lot of these guys and a lot of ham clubs, we share a lot of the same opinions on stuff. They're the good group of guys to be able to communicate with. And that's a really easy way to exercise those communication skills. Maybe not the tactical ones, you know, you're not looking at this from a tactical perspective where you have to worry about emissions control and like a pace plan, but you're getting on the radio and you're talking and you're messing around with different antennas and power settings, you know, and guys are giving you feedback. And, you know, if you listen to a lot of ham chatter, a lot of guys are just like giving each other feedback on how good their signal is, and, you know, what kind of setup they've got, what kind of antenna they're using. And then they just chit chat about all sorts of stuff. You got a very good place to start. It's a little bit daunting, I think, because there's some testing involved and stuff, man. But like Alex said, the test is super easy to get, you know, your initial license, and then you can start hanging out, go to the ham club once a month, or, I'll check in on Sunday in the afternoon. There's a lot of different nets that, they hop on, and you can get on there and just say, hey, how's everybody doing? Check your radio out. And that's good. A lot of times during disasters, they'll activate those nets too to pass information if the infrastructure goes down. And a lot of that stuff has been built into the ham culture for well before a lot of us were thinking like this. These guys were thinking about this back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They've been
backup generators.
That's right. Yeah, they've been building this infrastructure, and I think that's a part of the community at large. Just the community, when I say just out there, not just necessarily firearms community, that's not leveraged enough from our side.
I've said it before here. Gun culture is expanding. It's really growing beyond the gun safe, and this is part of I would not be surprised at some point in time that the term gun culture is apropos, because it just is a reference to so much of America or Americana of it is a little bit of a return to that rugged, not individualism, but that rugged capability. This is America. America is taking care of our families and our neighborhoods. And America is not appealing to Washington to save us from this movement theory. It's no, we're going to solve our own problems. And that's really back into a government for, by, and of the people. It doesn't need to be perceived as a threat. It is a set of virtues where it's not that we're us against. This is just what we're doing. So last question, and this is entirely intended to be a little bit of a cliffhanger question, but we've talked a little bit about kind of the basics and the introduction into radio capabilities. And that's things like a comms plan is not advanced radio communications methodology, nor is having a pace plan. And if you can't do the basics, there's nothing moving on to the intermediate. Now, for those of us who are engaging in this communications pathway of being a part of gun culture, or being a part of America, or whatever as a hobby, whether it's the Ham Radio Club, what do you see as the graduation from basic to intermediate?
I would say that moving on into starting to dabble in digital radio and encryption. And to do that, Alex talked over how to do that legally with a business license. But that stuff starts adding into it a little bit. And I would say going, just to the left and right of that would be talking about beyond line of sight communications, getting into high frequency communications. HF is a part of the spectrum that's on the lower side of the spectrum. And the properties of those waves are that the ionosphere, there's a part of our atmosphere that wave cannot escape. So it's refracted, it's bent and shoved back down to Earth. And that's how we did beyond line of sight communications before there were satellites and retrans stations like microwaves. That's how we did BLOS in World War II. We still do beyond line of sight now like that. And a lot of our when I talk about super hardened communications infrastructure, a lot of that revolves around the nuclear deterrent, and the triad with the bombers, the ground-based missiles, and the submarines, and how we communicate when it's really hit the fan. Is a lot of that goes back to HF and extremely low frequency, which goes through water, and that's how they're able to send really. It takes a long time to send the information, but they're able to send information to submarines underwater by doing that.
Okay.
And that's when you get with the command and control aircraft that will tow an antenna that's a couple miles long out of its tail to communicate. Communicate with that. Because the rule of thumb is the lower the frequency, the longer the antenna.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not a water boy, so.
Yeah, the higher the frequency, the smaller the antenna, so the waves get much more condensed And the lower frequencies, the waves are much bigger, and it so happens to be so that they're big enough they can get into water a little bit and talk to stuff underwater, which is important for the nuclear deterrent.
So a basic understanding of communications is, so in one part, very theoretical, of like, I understand how to set up. It's theoretical. It's very abstract. It's the abstract object of a PACE plan. It's the abstract object of a communications plan. It's the abstract object
it's just
of
kind of there. There's some overall, there's some just basics that you can apply to all of this stuff.
So where like, we're like in shooting, the basics and the fundamentals are sight picture, drawing in a handgun, shouldering a rifle. The more intermediate level skill sets when it comes to shooting is movement and timing, and it's not even reloads. That's still basic, but like combining a movement and a skill. And then advanced is stacking the deck so far that you're able to, I would say, like one idea of what basic, intermediate, and advanced when it comes to shooting a rifle looks like is basic is being able to shoulder and hit your target regardless of, within its capabilities. So a mastery of basics is that regardless of the target's distance within my engagement, realistic engagement, whatever, like you're using an M4-esque AR-15, I can hit a target reasonably at up to about 500 yards, and I can continuously and reasonably hit it anywhere in that range. That means being able to range it and hit it. Intermediate is being able to combine that skill set, and so basic includes like malfunctions and reloads and all that kind of stuff.
Individual tasks, yeah.
Yep. Intermediate is being able to accomplish a shooting stage, in like a not a 3-gun, but like in like a complicated shooting stage competently, where it requires me to combine skills. So that means shooting close and then shooting far, reloading, moving, and being able to being able to complete that whole thing without kind of stuttering my way through it. Whereas like advanced is then being able to determine whether or not I do this set of maneuvers or this set of maneuvers on the fly immediately. And so the beginner is having the skills, the intermediate is being able to combine the skills, and the advanced is being able to choose from a massive list of skill sets to on the fly immediately and appropriate to the scenario that's being presented. When it comes to communications, it's not so. When it comes to guns, these are all abstract concepts, but when it comes to communications, it's being able to operate the radio and develop the basic plan. And then intermediate is being able to broaden this series of radios and communication spectrums that you can engage in. Is that what you say?
I think intermediate. I think a basic radio operator can take his radio and talk to another radio just like it. He can talk point to point. They can do that. Intermediary, might be a little bit of interoperability, like having to know how to this radio can talk to both of these. I can change the frequency, and I could talk to this other type of radio. And then I think more of the advanced stuff comes in with using repeaters, using beyond line of sight communications, which is like a satellite, like using SATCOM, just like using a repeater.
Okay.
That's basically all it is in the sky. And then, I think it really, they're just building blocks. And it can be as complicated as you want. You can make this very complicated, or you can make it very simple. And I tend to stay on the simple side because, keep it simple. When it gets bad, people always tend to revert back to like the simplest tasks, and so I would say, if you're looking at getting into communications, you haven't dipped your toes in this yet. So a good way to start would be get just a very popular, cheap handheld radio. There's a bunch of them out there besides the Baofeng. There's a lot of, but getting your buddies on the same line, and then talking, figuring it out, and then a really good way to gain experience is to join a local ham club. Link in with those, gain some experience, and then down the line you could start thinking of, okay, I understand this now, and this radio kind of sucks. I want it to do I need it to do X, Y, and Z. And then you'll have the know-how to be like, okay, I'm going to go after a DMR for this reason, a P25 for this reason. And then, you could, the sky's the limit. You can figure out all sorts of stuff from there, integrating different stuff and, and doing more, training on it, just to figure out techniques that's going to work for you. They might not work for somebody else, but it works for your little group. But yeah, it is. You can draw a lot of lines and progression, back to firearms. You're learning the basics, and you're learning a little bit more advanced stuff, and you can't really skip to the advanced stuff without learning the basics. You could do it, but it wouldn't do you any good.
Yeah,
you could go right to the advanced. But
well, I think some of what we're doing is we're exploring what that means now, because it's not oh, you're advanced when you're an Army Ranger. You're not advanced when you're a squad leader. You're not advanced when you finish a designated marksman class, because we're citizens. We're not all in the military. And so things do have a different kind of approach to it. So, but I think it's an enjoyable conversation to have. And I think it's one that I do think that gun culture is much more open to now. And so I want to thank you for coming on the show and talking about these parts and some of the things that demystifying the subject. It's the same thing when it comes to our culture as a whole. When we place this idea of the AR-15 on this pedestal, it's the bloody version of Excalibur at all times, people start to get this idea that it's something that it isn't. Whereas, when we put, or I think that the dual negative side of when we put the gun concept on a pedestal is that it either becomes the devil and everything that it does is bad, or it becomes this icon of salvation. And when we make it an idol in the very religious sense, it becomes either it becomes our downfall on either side, whether it's a false salvation or it's a false enemy. And we forget that people are the things that do bad, not objects. Yeah. And so communications is the same way, is that it's not that I'm trying to take away the skill set of it. It's how do I do this? What is it? What is it? Something that I don't even want to invest in, and I want to know before I come up with my moralism on it. Yeah, the big
these little devices, they're teamwork enablers, and if you think there's a point in time where you may have to operate as a team, it might be something good to look into. They're fun. I enjoy them. I've always been kind of mystified by radios. I think I got my first police scanner. I was 8 or 9. And by the time I was 13, I had 3 or 4 of them. And I was listening to all sorts of stuff I wasn't supposed to. And I was really getting into it. And then once I got into the service, that's when I really got my hands on, tech that I could never afford myself. I could, and how it is. Sometimes I just have free reign to play with the stuff. I was doing things I probably wasn't supposed to do, but I was doing them, and I was learning some really valuable lessons while I was doing it. So, well, then, where can people find you, and what's the best way for people to find your work, your company, and what you guys produce? Yeah. So, like I mentioned before, just DISCO32.com. If you Google DISCO32, you'll get all sorts of stuff on us. Website has a bunch of, a lot of accessories, things that will help you just solve these real nagging problems when you're trying to get your setup together. We have, we're on social media. We don't pump out as much technical content because basically we're growing a business, and sometimes it kind of gets in the way of growing the business, is, producing all of this content, especially when you're growing and you're trying to, get payroll done, you got responsibilities, you're taking care of people. But yeah, you can definitely do that. And I would really recommend guys look into their local ham clubs. Don't take my word for it. Don't take some dude on Reddit's word for it. Go meet with a ham guy and, make some friends and learn for some dudes that have some legitimate experience communicating. And some of those guys are very, very, very good. talking all around the world from their basement. And there's they've spent a lifetime crafting those skills in that hobby. So I would definitely leverage that. You could always read field manuals and stuff. If you're into that, you can go to the Combined Army Registry and read to your heart's content. Or you can just, get together with your buddies and play around with radios and figure it out on your own. Just, I guess it's up to you to make those decisions about how you're going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Josh, thank you for coming on. Thank you for having this conversation. I think I've definitely learned quite a bit, and some of it is going a little bit down memory lane and remembering, I remember when I had to learn how to do this with a radio, and I maybe have learned about pressing the buttons and making the sounds, but now it's a little bit more like I think I've really gained a better perspective on how I would want to reconsider a communications plan, just with the people that I know, and why I would, and so I thank you for that. And thank you for taking time, to be on here with the Redacted Culture Cast. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. First time I've been on a podcast. I don't know if I sound like an idiot or not. Hopefully not. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about comms a little bit. And I did go down a few rabbit holes there, so I apologize. And maybe we can get on here again sometime and talk about some more kind of interesting stuff on the communication side.
Let's do it. 2023 is going to be a busy year for us, so let's
Awesome.
let's put some things on the calendar.
Cool.
Well, this has been the Redacted Culture Cast. For those who are still listening, thank you very much for tuning in to some of the things that we're talking about when it comes to like gun culture and the expanse within America, the new Americana, let's just call it. So we thank you for your time. We thank you for your support. You can always head to redactedllc.com. That's where you'll find our merch and the support channels there. And then stay tuned for what's to come, because at this point in time, Season 1, Operation 2 has been announced. So if you have purchased stuff from us, watch your mailbox. We'll have some stuff incoming. Other than that, we'll talk to you all later. See you soon.